بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم أخرجني من ظلمات الوهم وأكرمني بنور الفهم اللهم افتح علينا أبواب رحمتك وانشر علينا خزائن علومك برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. We, Alhamdulillah, have tawfiq to continue our discussion about divine attributes. In the last session, we said that divine attributes are divided into two major groups. Those which are related to His essence, and we call them real attributes, and those which are related to a relation that exists between God and His creatures. These are sifat fi'l, attributes of action. Attributes of action do not indicate any kind of perfection necessarily. They may exist, they may not exist. For example, you say, God gave me a child today, or God didn't give me a child. This doesn't mean that if you say gave you child, he's, for example, perfect. If he doesn't give you, he's not perfect. This doesn't mean a kind of perfection necessarily. These are abstracted when our mind reflects on the relation between God and His creatures. Khaliqiyat, raziqiyat, qafiriyat, to be creator, to be sustainer, to be forgiving. These are attributes of action which are all relational. Attributes of essence are about perfection, something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has. But these are also two types. Some of them you don't need to consider anything other than God. Please be careful about the way I'm making distinction. In the attributes of action, it's about a relation. Attributes of essence is about the essence, but for some of them you need to consider something else. For some of them you don't need to consider something else. And both of them are different from attributes of action. For example, when you think about knowledge of God about Himself, so you don't need to consider anything else. This is an attribute for divine essence and has no relation. You don't need to consider anything else. This is what philosophers call al-haqiqiyatul mahdha. It's haqiqiyya because it's about divine essence. It's not idafi. Okay? It's not relational. And it is mahdha because simply, purely about His essence. But, for example, when you consider power of God, power is haqiqiyya, but dhatu idafa. It's a kind of real quality, but involves something else. Not something which has been created and you reflect on the relation. No, even maybe that thing doesn't exist. But for us to understand power, we have to always consider the ability of God to do or not to do something. You have to consider something. Or knowledge of God about other things. Not knowledge of God about Himself. Knowledge of God about other things. Does God know about His creatures? Yes. Does he know about them in his essence? Yes. He has essential knowledge about creatures, even when they don't exist. But knowledge as a quality of action can only be when something exists. You understand? So, God has two types of knowledge about us. One is essential and eternal. He knows about us even before we are created. And he has a second knowledge of us, which is attribute of action, and that is something that can come in certain time when we come to exist. For example, Allah says, عَلِمَ أَن سَيَكُونُ مِنْكُمْ مَرْضَى عَلِمَ أَنَّكُمْ كُنْتُمْ تَخْتَانُونَ أَنفُسَكُمْ. Here, we realize that knowledge is a quality of action. Because as God knew, for example, you are betraying yourself. This is an explanation why the ruling changed. Initially, they were asked not to have marital relation in the months of Ramadan, even during the nights. Yeah? Then, this ruling was changed, and they could have marital relation during the night. Why it changed? Allah says, Allah knew that you have been betraying. Didn't he know that they were betraying before they betrayed? We say as a quality of action, no. Because it didn't exist. Something must come to existence so that it is known as a quality of action. But in his essence, he knows everything in advance. So, the qualities of essence are real. We call them haqiqiyya. But again, it can be mahdha or dhatu idafa. Mahdha means you don't need to consider anything else. Dhatu idafa means you have to consider something else. Life of God is mahdha or dhatu idafa. Is mahdha, life. Life of God, you don't need to consider anything else. Yeah? Knowledge of God about himself, mahdha or dhatu idafa. Mahdha. But power is dhatu idafa. Knowledge of God about other things, dhatu idafa. Okay? And then we have qualities of action which are completely relational. Now we can move on to the next discussion. This is about qualities of God being identical with his essence. Qualities of God, which we mean real qualities, are identical with his essence. The reason we discuss this is because we want to avoid misunderstanding. Because if we are not careful, we may think of God like human beings, for example, or other beings. For us, many of our qualities, not all, but many of our qualities are not identical with our essence. They are accidental. They are like addition to us. For example, if someone has knowledge, how do you explain knowledge? There is a human being who didn't have knowledge, now has knowledge. This knowledge is accidental. It's not essential. It's a second existence, a second being. So we have his essence and we have knowledge. This knowledge sometimes can be there, sometimes doesn't exist. And also in different people can be different. Or when you are, for example, say generous, you can be generous, you can lose generosity. It's possible. When it comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, his qualities are not like us. If he has knowledge, his knowledge is not accidental. It's not that there is an essence as one being and there is knowledge as another being. Now they exist together like us. For Allah is not like this. His knowledge and His essence are not two, are not separate. His power and His essence, or His power and His knowledge. So neither attributes nor attribute and essence are different beings. There is one being. We look at it intellectually from different perspective. Why I say intellectually? Because that being itself doesn't have angle. Yeah, it's the way we look at it. Otherwise, it has no angle. It's simple and absolute. Okay, basit min jami' al jihad. From every aspect, it is simple. Yes, we may once focus on the essence, another time on the knowledge, another time on power, another time on life, on will. But these are our considerations. In Aqaid, as you remember, we said some ulama have used this poem for explaining the relation between God and His qualities. عباراتنا شتى وحسنك واحد كل إلى ذاك الجمال يشير. We use different expressions, but your beauty is one. All expressions that we use refer to the same beauty. Sometimes you look at it from perspective of knowledge. Sometimes you look at it from perspective of power, life, mercy, whatever. But we have only one being. It's not like us. We are a combination of essence and accidents. God is one. So, qualities of God are like some attributes that we also may have, which are not additional. If you remember, we were saying this before, that we also have some predicates that can be used and they don't involve addition. Like, for example, when we say something is one, wahda is not something which is added. When you have one being, each of us is one. Yeah? Is oneness added to us like knowledge? No. Or imkan is to be contingent added to us? No. This is what we call mahmul min samimeh. You remember we said Haji Sabziwari uses this expression. Mahmul bidhamimah, mahmul min samimeh. Mahmul bidhamimah means it's attached. It's from outside. Like color, like knowledge, like generosity. It's bidhamimah means with attachment. Min samimeh means it's taken out of the essence. We are not adding, we are just trying to draw out through intellectual process. Yeah? So for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is like this. The same thing that we use for wahda or imkan, all the qualities of God are like this. So there is no quality which is additional to His essence. In the books on kalam and philosophy, sometimes they use the expression ziyada. Whether sifa is zaida ala dhat or not. We say no zaida. And in Nahjul Balagha, when Amir al-Mu'minin says kamalul ikhlas lah nafyu sifat an, the perfect purity and purification is to remove sifat from God. He means by removing sifat, removing additional sifat. Because some people had this understanding that sifat of God are za'id. They are additional to His essence. Like Mu'tazila. Mu'tazila had the idea that we have essence and 7 qualities. And altogether we have 8 eternal things. Qudama thamaniya. We say there is only one thing, not 8 things. So when Amir al-Mu'minin says Kamalul Ikhlas and Nafyu Sifat, and he means by Sifat those qualities which are additional to essence. The way that Mu'tazilites, for example, thought. He doesn't mean that Allah has no qualities. He means something which is additional. Now,
so can you give me an example of, for example, a man who is father and grandfather, brother and son? There's one man but with different place. Can we give the same example for
yes.
one man?
Yes, but that is relational.
So how can we distinguish? Is there any example we can give for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala?
Like imkan for us, wahda for us, bil fi'l for us. Yeah. The next issue is now how to argue for divine qualities, how to prove divine qualities. Burhan. What is burhan? What is proof, demonstration for divine qualities? I hope you remember Burhan al-Siddiqeen of Mullah Sadra. Do you remember? Burhan al-Siddiqeen was an attempt to argue for the existence of God from God himself, from existence itself, not from anything else. Not to use his creatures to prove his existence. Not even to use Burhanul Illat wal Ma'lul or Wujub and Imkan. Okay? That was the idea of Mullah Sadra. Of course, we said first Ibn Sina introduced Burhan al-Siddiqeen, but the way he argued was Wujub and Imkan. Mullah Sadra wanted to even go further and developed another version of Burhan al-Siddiqeen, which is based on his idea of Asalatul Wujud. We used this argument before for proving the existence of God. We used it also about the unity of God. You remember we talked about unity of God also in this way. We can use the same argument for qualities of God and to show that his qualities are identical. So, first remember again Asalatul Wujud. That's the key thing. What is Asalatul Wujud? Yes. We said Asalatul Wujud means that existence or being is the main thing. What really exists, what primarily exists is existence, not mahiyya, not quiddity or whatness. If you remember on whiteboard, I drew for you triangle and a square, and I said mahiyya is the limit. If you have a piece of paper and you make it triangle or square or circle, that paper is what they have. But what makes them triangle or square is where they end. Mahiyya is where we end. What makes us different from each other is not existence as such, is how much we have existence. Therefore, it is our lack of existence that determines us, not existence itself. Because when you say the amount of existence or the extent of existence, it means that much that we lack, okay, makes us different from each other. So, first, Asalatul Wujud. The only thing that exists, the only thing that has reality is Wujud, existence. Okay? Then, anything that is a matter of perfection must be about existence. Because Adam, opposite to existence is what? It's Adam. Non-existence. Non-existence does not have any perfection. Is nothing. Non-existence has no perfection. So, if there is knowledge, if there is life, if there is will, if there is power, are these for existence or non-existence? These are for existence. So, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is absolute existence. Okay? So, anything which is a matter of perfection is also about existence. So, He has them. And since His existence is absolute, has no limits, He has them in an absolute way. He has absolute knowledge, absolute power, absolute life. Because if He has limited knowledge, it means then His existence is limited. But His existence is absolute. His qualities are very much different from our qualities. Because our qualities, like our existence, are limited. If we have knowledge, it's limited. Because our existence is also limited. Sometimes our qualities are based on the limited perfection that we have. Sometimes it's about lacking them. For example, someone is ignorant, so lacks knowledge. What makes a person ignorant is lacking knowledge. So, we need to remember that anywhere we get to absolute existence, all the qualities also become absolute. Okay? There is no way to think of absolute being but limited knowledge. Absolute being, limited power. Because then there is no explanation. What has made this power limited? If the being is absolute, and if the perfection is existential, as we said. If perfection was not existential, you could say, for example, was something about Adam. But if it is existential, then absolute existence means absolute perfection. But there are two other ways to argue for qualities of God. One is philosophical, one is theological. And in both ways they use creatures of God. Philosophers, other than those who use Burhan al-Siddiqeen by Mullah Sadra, they use a philosophical argument based on causality. Cause and effect. The effect receives everything from its cause. Yeah? Because effect has nothing of itself. Yeah? Everything comes to the effect to ma'lul from illah, from the cause. If ma'lul has wujud, comes from the cause. If it has ilm, comes from there. If it has beauty, power, anything, comes from the cause. Yeah? Now, question. Is it possible that God, who is our creator, lacks knowledge while we have knowledge? We have some knowledge. Yeah? So many sciences, so many books. We have some knowledge. Can God lack knowledge and we have it? No. Because everything that we have comes from Him. Philosophers say, مُعْطِ الشَّيْء لا يمكن أن يكون فاقدا للشيء. When something is giver, it must itself have it so that he can give. Yeah? And you also have to remember, those who are not familiar with philosophy may say, okay, sometimes I have something, I give, and then I don't have it anymore. For example, I have a book, I give it to you, then I don't have it. I have money, I give it to you, I don't have it. We say, no, this is not the relation of cause and effect. The relation of cause and effect remains for the whole period that the effect exists. Cause is not projecting effect out of itself and giving some qualities away. Effect is always dependent on the cause. Its existence keeps coming, then the qualities keep coming. It's much more than this, but if you want to have an example, we said it's like sun and its radiation. If sun is not there, radiation stops. Yeah? But it is even greater than this. So, we see qualities in creatures like knowledge, power, life. And these come from their cause. So Allah, who is the ultimate cause, must have all these qualities. Otherwise, where these get such things? Where do these come from? They cannot give to themselves. If they want to give to themselves, it means that they must have it before having it. This is contradiction. And also they don't have anything of their own because their wujud is coming from something else. And all these things are matter of wujud. These are qualities of wujud. So everything comes from God, therefore he must have it. The other argument is what mutakallimin normally develop and use. And instead of using the language of cause and effect, they say when we look at the creatures, look at the world, especially if you have science, you are equipped with science, you see so much of order and purposefulness and connection are there. You remember in Islamic belief system, we said the argument from design refers to three things. There is order, there is purpose, and connection. Everything is connected. So, when we reflect on the creation, we come to know that there is intelligent designer and does things exactly at due time, or things happen in the exact place that they should happen. How our body functions, so many things that we discuss in argument from design. This shows that there must be knowledge. It's intelligent designer. There must be knowledge. And still we are trying to discover the knowledge which is used in creation. There is knowledge. There is will. Because if there was no will, then things should always be there. But we see things happen in different times. Sometimes they don't happen, sometimes they happen. So it means there is a decision. And when there is knowledge and will, there is power, there is life. So reflection on the world, the nature, the dunya, leads to the conclusion that it must be created by intelligent designer who has knowledge and will and power and life. So these two arguments, the second and the third, have one common point. What's the common point? We mentioned 3 arguments. One was Burhan Siddiqeen. Second was philosophical explanation that effect receives everything from the cause. The third was reflecting on the creation as we learn in Kalam, in theology. What is common between the second and the third is that both of them reflect on the effect on creatures of God. They study first the creatures and then they say, God must also have knowledge. God must also have power. But in the first argument, directly we talk about God. There is also another thing. It's a very delicate issue. The second and the third argument prove that God has knowledge. So much knowledge that can be responsible for all these beautiful designs, all these orders. God must have knowledge enough to do this, power enough to do this. But it seems that the second and third argument cannot prove absolute knowledge or absolute power. We can say he must have enough knowledge to do this, or knowledge more than us, life greater than us. But to prove that he has absolute knowledge or absolute power seems to be not possible if you only use second or third argument. Because you start from creation and you want to say God has something to explain how there is intelligence here, how there is beauty here, how knowledge is here. But here there is no absolute. If in the world of creation there was absolute knowledge, we could say God also should have absolute knowledge. But here is limited knowledge. Although it's great, but still is limited. So the second and the third argument show that God knows everything in this world. Yes. He knows everything in this world because it's created by him. He has power over everything in this world because created by him. But to say that he has absolute knowledge and absolute power seems not possible if you only use second or third argument. If you want to say absolute knowledge and power, you have to use the argument of Mulla Sabra, which is based on wujud. God is simple, absolute being. No way for Adam to come to him. And all the limitations come from Adam. Existence doesn't limit. It's Adam that limits. Now, we move on to the next lesson. This is one of the old and famous questions in both Kalam and philosophy. The question of huduth and qidam. Huduth and qidam. We had this also in Baba Hadi Ash and other places. Is this world hadith or qadim? Huduth is the noun, and then we have hadith as adjective. Qidam is the noun, and we have qadim as adjective. In the same book also we had a long discussion before about this issue. But here we studied from another perspective. Mutakallimin and philosophers both study actions of God. First, we want to explain why we studied this in philosophy. Both mutakallimin, theologians, and philosophers study actions of God. So in addition to the essence of God that we studied and qualities of God, You should study actions of God. And one action is creation. So we want to study creation. You may say, why we study actions of God in philosophy? We can leave it to other sciences. Physics, chemistry, all are studying things which are created by God. Why we study them in philosophy? The answer is, actions of God can be studied in two ways. This is a very important point to understand the relation between philosophy and science. Actions of God can be studied in two ways. Sometimes you study them as they are. You look at them themselves. This is what sciences do. Sometimes you look at them in relation with God. Action which is made or created by God. In philosophy, this second approach is applied. So, there's a human being, there's an animal, there is a plant, there is water. These are all actions of God. These are all creatures of God. Yeah? Things that God has made. Sometimes you study them scientifically. In science, there is no discussion about causality. Yeah? In the sense of originating cause. In science, we study how, not why. Yeah? There is rain. We ask how rain is produced. But we never address in science who created rain or water. Yeah? So, in science, we deal with actions of God separated from God. In philosophy, we look at the actions of God as related to Him. We want to explain how these actions are issued or are made by God. So there's two different perspectives. Of course, it's very good to have both. If you know how things happen, and at the same time look at them as things which are created by God. People who don't know the difference between the two, if they study science, they may get confused and think that, okay, we explain everything in science, so we don't need God. But the answer is, you explain in science how things happen, not why things happen. Yeah? So, and these never contradict each other. Actually, they supplement each other. So, you can, for example, study how a child is produced. But this doesn't mean that father, mother give existence to child. Even they cannot give existence to themselves, let alone to give to someone else. Yeah? So these are two different attitudes. So why we study divine actions here and not just divine essence and qualities? Because there is a way that only philosophy can help to understand actions of God. And that is actions in relation to God. We want to look at them from a general perspective. Okay? So, this is something to begin with. So, the relation of these things with God is important for us. Now, let's move on to the issue of huduth and qidam of alam. Because this is about action of God. Because creation of dunya, of this world, this universe, is action of God. Okay? Most of mutakallamun, not all, because there are mutakallamun, especially after Khaja Nasiruddin Tusi, who have accepted the idea of philosophers. But most of mutakallamin have the idea that this world is huduth. And they mean huduth zamani. Means this world didn't exist and then came into existence. If you want to simplify, say there was a time that this world didn't exist and then God created it. Okay? This is what most of the theologians say. For them, the only thing that always existed is God, is wajibul wujud. Because they think to be qadim and to be wajibul wujud are the same. To be eternal, to have no beginning, means wajibul wujud, to have necessity of being. Anything other than God is huduth. This is the way most of mutakallimin have viewed this idea. Of course, if you ask them, there's a good question here in the book. If you ask mutakallimin, if this world didn't exist before, and it was only God, what does it mean that you say there was a time that this world didn't exist? There should be no time if nothing existed. They answer yes. They say this is a kind of they say wahmi. It's a kind of imaginary time. There was really no time, because time is when you have something which changes. But our mind considers a kind of imaginary time as a container, although it is empty, it's just imagination. We say there was a time that this world didn't exist. But if you want to be more precise, you can say it in another way. You can say this world has began at a certain time. Okay? It means that you cannot go backward endlessly. There is a fixed time span for the world. Okay? So you can count. Even if it is big, you can count. Say, this many years, this many millions of years. But there is a beginning. So if we say that there was a time that this world didn't exist, that is musamaha. That's a kind of imaginary language for make it simple. What we mean is that whatever is the life of this world is limited. There is a beginning for it. It has started at certain point, and from that point, of course, time also started. But this time is not endless, it's not infinite. And they say, this is what we understand from scriptures, from Quran, even from Bible, Old Testament, New Testament. So it seems theologians, whether they are Muslims, Jews or Christians, they all have this idea. There is another approach, that is the approach of philosophers. Muslim philosophers have the idea that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is most gracious. He is fayyad ala al-itlaq. His graciousness is absolute. He is da'imul fayd. He continuously gives his grace. This is a very important point for philosophical position. They say we cannot think of God not being gracious. If God is gracious, so having God means we should also have grace of God. and creation is gracious act of God. So philosophers say that if there is God, there must be creation. They say there is no reason why only wajibul wujud has to be qadim zamani, to be eternal in time. Even creatures of God can be eternal. What is important to prove the need for cause, what explains the need of the effect, as we said before, what is manatu hajat al-ma'lul ila al-illah, what's the criterion for effect needing cause, is not huduth, it's imkan. You remember we had this discussion. Mutakallimin said when something is hadith, needs creator, needs cause. Philosophers say no, when something is contingent, is mutasawa nisba ila al-wujud wal-adam, has equal relation to existence and non-existence, then it needs cause. No matter how many years or how long it has existed. If something is mumkin, it's mumkin, whether it is qadim or hadith. If it is hadith, its need is also hadith. If it is eternal, its need is also eternal. Okay? Therefore, they said we should introduce another concept, and that is huduth zati, opposite to huduth zamani, and qidam zati, opposite to qidam zamani. We say when something in its essence lacks existence and then is given by its cause existence, this is hadith. Hadith zati. If you remember, we had this point. Al-mumkinu min zatihi an yakuna lays. وَمِنْ عِلَّتِهِ أَنْ يَكُونَ أَيْس. Mumkin, contingent beings, if they are left to themselves, what they deserve is not to exist. Existence comes from the cause. Okay? So, they introduced the concept of huduth zati. Means in existence, they are dependent. But how much they have existed, how long they have existed, it doesn't make any problem. If it is too big or too short, they are dependent. They are needy. So, philosophers say, this is a very important point. They say, whenever we think of God, of course, for God we cannot say time. Okay? This is why I say whenever we think about God, because I cannot say whenever God existed, because God doesn't exist in time. Okay? So, whenever we think of God, we think of also His gracious acts of creation. Okay? There was no beginning for this. It didn't begin. It always existed. But this doesn't mean that these things that we see in the world, these are eternal. We are all created in time. We all have a definite, time span. Even if you look at the whole world, everything seems to be starting at a certain point. There are two things that they said they are eternal in the world. One is kulliyat, the universal. One is aflak, non-earthy materials, the skies. Skies, we don't talk about them because part of the tabi'iyat, the physics, and that physics is not our interest right now. But about kulliyat, it's important because Mullah Sadra later modifies their idea. Do you remember the concept of kulliya tabi'i? Kulliya tabi'i, natural universal concept. You know, me and you, we are all human beings. We are different instances of human beings, aren't we? We are different instances of human beings. Even if we are tired, we are full human beings. Okay? When each of us comes to existence, suppose there was no human being on the earth, and one of us comes to existence. With our existence, not only we come to exist, humanity comes to exist. Humanity is a universal concept, is kulliyya tabi'i. When I come to exist, humanity comes to exist. When you exist, humanity exists. Okay? So, in each of us, humanity exists. Okay? So, philosophers say that human beings are huduth, zamanan. Okay? Each of us has lived for a certain period of time. But no matter how much you go backward, there were always human beings who were themselves huduth, but in them humanity existed eternally. Okay? At least, if humanity didn't exist eternally, at least major elements, major anasor existed, like fire, water, soil, and wind, for example, air. Mullah Sadra, of course, as I said, comes and modifies this idea. And he does not accept that humanity is eternal. And he says, even if we have human beings for all history, we go back and we find no beginning, this doesn't make humanity eternal. Because humanity comes into existence with each individual, and with the death of that person, that kulli that existed in him comes to an end. So, created human beings would not create a kind of eternal humanity. Inshallah, we will talk about this later. So, for philosophers, God is always generous, gracious. He creates. There is no possibility of thinking that he was there and not creating, then he has started creating. The whole world is eternal, but elements, parts can be huduth. What is exclusive to God is not qidam zamani, it's qidam dhati. This is the idea of the philosophers. What about Mullah Sadra? Mullah Sadra again relies on asalatul wujud. There is no way to understand Mullah Sadra without understanding asalatul wujud, because his philosophy is very much based on wujud. Philosophers before Mullah Sadra, they were using more concepts which are about mahiyya. I mentioned this before, I think, that, for example, when they wanted to prove existence of God or cause, they were talking about hajatul mahiyya, about imkan, which is not wrong, but based on asalatul wujud, it's more direct to talk about existence than mahiyya. Mahiyya is not illusion. It's wrong to think mahiyya is illusion. Mahiyya is not illusion, it's correct. But mahiyya is secondary. When you can look at something which is primary, why you look at something which is secondary? When you can look at something directly, why you look at mirror? Mahiyya is secondary, wujud is primary. Okay? So Mullah Sadra tries to use existence. If you remember, we had this discussion that philosophers say the reason for dependence on Allah is imkan dhati. But Mullah Sadra brings the idea of imkan wujudi or faqr. Says there are two types of being: independent being and dependent being. So instead of saying wajib and mumkin, which is about God and our mahiyya, which is mumkin, he says we have self-sufficient, self-subsistent being, which is God, and we have dependent and needy being, which is us. We are nothing other than dependence and poverty. Okay? We are all dependent on God. Everything other than God is dependent on God. Even angels, which are mujarrad and have no time, according to philosophers, they are eternal. They have no time, but they are also dependent. Their type of existence is needy and poor. Ya ayyuhan nas antumul fuqara'u ila Allah wallahu huwal ghani. Only He is rich. Human beings and anything else depends on God. So, Mullah Sadra says, what is the reason for need is this dependent, needy, poor existence that we have. Not huduth zamani. So, because we are needy in our existence, we need God. Okay? Then, he says, God has created everything and they are all dependent on Him, and they, regardless of any quality that they have, they cannot survive or come to existence without God. But then he tries to say something about huduth zamani. Although he has some commonality or similarity with philosophers, he has a similarity with mutakallimin. He wants to talk about a kind of huduth zamani. But the way he talks about huduth zamani is different from mutakallimin, but to some extent it looks similar. And that is what I just told you a few minutes ago. He says, philosophers said that parts of this world are hadith, except from aflak. But the whole world is qadim because kulliya tabi'i has always existed, although the instances were coming and going. Mullah Sadra says we cannot say because instances were coming and going, then Kulliya Tabi'i was eternal. This is a little bit difficult. Please listen carefully. Imagine there is one person in this room. In this person, human being or humanity exists. This person leaves the room. We say Zayd has left the room. We can say there is no humanity in the room. No nature of human is in the room. Then another person comes. We say, okay, now we have Amr. We can say again we have humanity in this room. Now question is, if at the same time that Zayd is leaving, Amr comes, can we say, please listen very carefully, can we say Zayd left, Amr came, but humanity continuously existed? Mullah Sadra says no. It is true that you can say always one human being was here, but we cannot say there is a being such as humanity which always existed here regardless of the individuals. So every person brings his humanity and takes away his humanity. You cannot say there is a continuous humanity existing as a kind of eternal being. This is your conceptualization. Otherwise, we don't have two things. One is Zayd and then one humanity. Then Zayd leaves, but humanity says, no, I want to stay in this room. It's not like that. Do you understand? So he disagrees with many philosophers and says, although we have always creatures, but we don't find anything which is eternal in time. This world has no beginning, but still this doesn't give eternity to anything in this world. Okay? So this is the idea of Mullah. So he is in a sense closer to the idea of Mutakallimin because he denies existence of any Qadime Zamani. He denies. At the same time, he doesn't accept that world has a beginning because it says that God must be always gracious and create. Of course, there are other views about this, and maybe I refer, inshallah, next session about to the view of Allama Tabatabai and my own little maybe conclusion. So this is basically the idea that we should know about huduth and qidam of alam. In the past, there were times that this was big debate, and some people even considered philosophers to be kafir. They said, why they believe in huduth, in qidam of alam. But you must know that this is their understanding of Quran, this is their understanding of Hadith, and they don't want to say anything against Quran and Hadith. This is the way that they think they can interpret the Quran and Hadith based on that philosophical understanding that they have, that God is most gracious and continuously gracious. Whether this is right or that is right, it's another thing. But as far as it is a scholarly discussion, it's welcomed. No one should accuse the other party of being kafir or being short-sighted. Philosophers also should not say mutakallimin are short-sighted. Mutakallimin also should not say they are liberal, for example. This is a scholarly discussion and should be discussed scholarly and academic circles. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin.